Hey, folks, it's time for the quote of the day. And today, I really didn't have a whole lot of choices. There were just not that many people that I wanted to quote. I actually, like, for about an hour, I was like, maybe I'm not even going to have a quote of the day today. But then I found one by somebody who you would think I would have a lot to work with from a king, but I really, I didn't have much to work with. Today is the birthday of one of the most famous kings of all time, and that is actually the last king of America, King George III. Today is his birthday. You would recognize him if you've ever, not recognize him, but you would know who I'm talking about if you've ever watched Hamilton. He's the bye, you'll be back guy. That's the character that is played there is King George III. He wasn't really like that. he was a little like that, but he was also not all there. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to quote him. I will say though, the only other person that was in contention for the quote today was Dr. Ruth Westheimer. Now, I know that some of you may not know who that is, but I promise you that those who do will be like, oh man, now, listen, she did say something that I thought was great, and I was going to use this as the quote of the day. I just didn't think I could really talk about it too much on here. One of my favorite quotes she ever said was, "The only 6 inches that matter when it comes to sex is the 6 inches between your ears." I loved to listen to that woman talk. And I remember I didn't know what she was saying because I was like really young when I started like first seeing her, but I knew that it was dirty stuff, and I was excited by that. So I I remember a lot of things that she said. I had no context for them at the time, but it's funny how you have that memory comes back, and you're like, oh, now I know. Anyway, we are going to quote King George, though, King George the Third. I looked all over. One of the things about him that's makes it difficult is that in his life, how do I say this? He became mentally unstable. There's a genetic condition that he had, and I can't for the life of me remember right now what it's called, but it basically led him to both mentally and physically to degrade over time. He did live a long time. He was king for like 59 years. So, I mean, this dude had a long, long life and a long reign. And for all intents and purposes, even though he's kind of mocked in like Hamilton and things like that, and he was mentally infirm in many periods of his life. And when I say infirm, I mean now we call that depression or manic episodes, and that's what it would be for him, which is something that I can absolutely relate to. But they were, I mean, as the king, when the king is depressed, it affects everybody. So it was a bad thing. It got to the point where his son George the Fourth, near I would say probably the last 10 years of his life, probably maybe not even that long, like 7 years I think it was. Basically stepped in and was like, okay, I got this. And he wasn't a very good king. George the Fourth wasn't a very good king, but George the Third, like I said, last king of America. Like that is something that's important to understand. A lot of people blame him for the England losing or Great Britain losing the colonies, but I really like if you look at the history, yeah, he wasn't exactly great, but I don't think it was really necessarily his fault. I think it would have happened under any king, the way, because it was a lot of the way that he approached America was the way that I think that a lot of kings would have. We did go to war, right? Like there were loss of life on both sides, and we just came out ahead because, well, we had a good general in Washington, and we had the resolve of, well, we don't have anywhere else to go. Our backs were to the wall, and we wanted freedom. Freedom for who? That's what we know now that was very much up for debate, but we just didn't want to be under the yoke of Great Britain. Now, the thing about him is like he's remembered for his mental illness, and he's remembered for losing America essentially, but he really should be remembered for a lot more than that. He was the king for essentially the Industrial Revolution in Great Britain, and he did steer the country in the right direction. Not only that, and I think that this, I mean, think about this. Think about this. He basically outlawed the slave trade in Great Britain, all of England. there were boats that were using England as a port, and over the course of, it took him some years. I think it was like 10, 15, 20 maybe years before he got the last one out, but they would come into harbor and they would pick up, whatever supplies and things like that, and then set sail from there to America to ship slaves here. And so he basically shut that down. This is a king that never owned any slaves himself, never had any, like actively was speaking out against this. Like, there were people that would make arguments for slavery, and one of them I talked about yesterday. Obviously a little bit different time period, but he just he I think he I can't remember the quote right now. I had it in my head a little bit ago, but he literally was calling people stupid, like just calling them dumb, calling them stupid, saying they were moronic and idiots for their arguments in favor of slavery. He was a staunch defender of people, and really did believe that everyone should have the, like, basically human rights, essentially. A good king. They actually call him the good king. His he just had, this condition, and obviously has the mark on his resume of losing America. That's not to say he was a perfect man. That's not in, by no stretch of the imagination am I saying that. Anybody that has that kind of power and has the ability to call the shots is going to make mistakes, and he did have plenty of errors in judgment and stances that especially when it came to religion and things like that, where he was not necessarily a good man or a good king, but he was a good man. He was, for all accounts, very faithful to his. I mean, he had to have been, because they had 15 fucking kids. That's pretty fucking faithful. That's, I mean, that's opening up your Fridays for only one thing, if you know what I'm saying. Dr. Ruth Westheimer would have had something to say about his 15 kids. Just so, he was, from all accounts, he was a good husband. He was good to his kids. He just had, the kind of the drunken power of being king, which affects pretty much, I think, anybody that would be in that position. Now, I want to make this clear. One of the reasons like I said, I struggled to find a quote, but I picked this one is because I think that it is very, very important for today. Again, this is a king who once said, anyone who doesn't agree with me is a traitor, and I can't remember the like, and a scum or something like that, or a villain or something like that. He this is something that when I first read it years ago, I thought, he's not a good guy. And then I read it again recently and I thought, oh, that's something that, our current people would say. But then I read this, and that changes everything for me. This quote it changed the way that I perceived this man. And that's one of the reasons why I spent a lot of time today trying to dig through and find it, is because I knew that he had said something like this, but I could not place it. And it took me hours to find this. So this is actually in some correspondence. This was a quote from a letter that he wrote. And so he never said this verbally, and that's one of the reasons why it's difficult, is you have to, look up all these different, he's thousands of letters that he wrote as a king. So I didn't know where to look. I had to really, filter down my Google searches to figure out, and it took a while. So anyway, today's quote of the day by King George III goes as such. Freedom of speech is not only the natural privilege of liberty, but also its support and preservation. Every man, therefore, here is allowed to declare his sentiments upon openly, to speak or write whatever is not prohibited by the laws. Now I'm going to read that again. I did mess up the word there. I'm going to read that again. Freedom of speech is not only the natural privilege of liberty, but also its support and preservation. Every man, therefore, here is allowed to declare his sentiments openly, to speak or write whatever is not prohibited by the laws. Now, obviously, prohibited by the laws says, well, there's some things you can't say. Well, we understand that. Even in America, there's some things you are not supposed to say. You're not supposed to yell fire in a crowded room. Like, we know these things. But for the most part, this was a man as a king, and this was really, honestly, not something that happened all the time, that allowed people to say what they needed to say. Don't you wish that we had a government that did that today, instead of policing the things that people say? I just thought that was a strange thing, and I wanted to talk about it. So there you go. Happy birthday to King George, the last king of America. And to the rest of you, Take care of yourself. Take care of others. I'll talk to you soon.